Now, please join me in welcoming a champion of women and girls around the world, a true global citizen, and a wonderful friend, Her Majesty Queen Rania of Jordan.
No stranger to the global stage, Her Majesty Queen Rania Al-Abdullah of Jordan is one of the world's most prolific campaigners. Using her very public position, Her Majesty champions numerous causes, including the rights of women and children, access to education for all, and supporting cross-cultural differences to help encourage dialogue and peace, not only in the Middle East, but around the world. As one of the most photographed people on the planet, a style and cultural icon, Her Majesty is followed by millions across social media platforms. Crossing divides and breaking down barriers, Queen Rania is as comfortable meeting heads of state as talking to those in need to bring about change. Campaigner, philanthropist, proponent of peace, wife and mother, Her Majesty Queen Rania Al-Abdullah of Jordan sits down with me for the CNBC conversation. Your Majesty Queen Rania, thank you so much for joining me on CNBC.
Thank you, it's a pleasure, Tanya.
I wanted to ask you about your foundation, the Queen Rania Foundation, that of course is about education and development. What state do you think education is in the Arab region today?
Well, you know, our region has had its fair share of headline-grabbing crises, but I think that one crisis that hasn't made it to the headlines is the education crisis. You know, we have over 15 million children in my part of the world who don't attend school because of conflict and displacement. And even those who attend school will tell you that access doesn't necessarily ensure quality. So they're getting an education that's not relevant for today's job market, let alone preparing them for the future. And that is really a crisis for us. You know, when you think of crisis, you think of a life-threatening situation that requires urgent action. And I believe that this is what this is. You know, we cannot wait for our ministries of education across the Arab world that are already overwhelmed, under-resourced, and bureaucratic to take the measures that need to be taken while we wait for generations of children that are growing up in darkness and being susceptible to extremist thought and hopelessness. You know more than I do that, you know, jobs and opportunities and hope are the strongest antidotes to extremism. And education is a prerequisite for hope. And so we really need to take urgent action. And because we can't wait, we need to look at some of the tools that are available today. So innovation, applying innovation to education is something that I'm very much focused on in my foundation. And that's why we've set up Idrak, which is an open online platform for adult learners. But we realized that we need to get to children from a younger age. And so we're developing Idrak now to become a platform that gives children access to free, quality, world-class education from the age of kindergarten all the way to grade 12. So we'll have e-curricula and learning resources online for those children. And I think that that could make the difference that we need to make because, as I said, it is an urgent issue. With education, unfortunately, because it's a long-term issue, sometimes people want to deal with the urgent, you know, things related to shelter and health, etc. And they forget that, you know, education maybe reaps its benefits in the long term, but if we don't take care of it now, if we think that the Arab world is a dangerous place today, imagine what it would look like when these young kids come of age. So we really need to take urgent action now.
Your Majesty, you're talking about the urgent action needed. You are going ahead with your initiatives to tackle this. So why do you think governments aren't doing more?
Well, you know, I think in the Arab world, as you can see, there's still a lot of turmoil. A lot of war and conflict in different countries, and I think our ministries are overwhelmed and very slow moving. And as I said, when people are just very preoccupied with the politics, and sometimes when there are interventions, they're humanitarian interventions, Unfortunately, education goes down the priority list. But for me, it is the most important thing. It is the game changer. It is the thing that can sort of change the trajectory for the Arab world and move us towards, tip the scales towards a more hopeful future for us all. And I always say a child that's denied an education isn't just a tragedy for that child. It leaves the rest of us vulnerable because, as you know now, conflict is mobile. A problem anywhere in the world can reach our doorstep. And so in order to protect ourselves, we really need to give these kids, empower them with the right kind of skills and knowledge so that they're not vulnerable to extremists who feed on the hopeless. And so education, I think, is the strongest thing that strongest intervention that we can make.
Of course, we're seeing the ongoing Syrian crisis. We've seen Jordan take over 1.3 million refugees. What impact has that had on your country?
Well, all over the world, there are about over 65 million displaced people. These are people who have been forced out of their homes because of conflict and persecution. And 90% of those people end up in developing countries. So it means that those countries that are least equipped to handle such a crisis are the ones who end up bearing the brunt of it. And Jordan has, as you mentioned, taken in 1.3 million refugees, which has had a devastating impact on our country. Only 10% of them are in refugee camps. The rest are in our towns and cities, which has had a tremendous impact on our infrastructure, our resources, jobs, services, so schools, healthcare centers, hospitals. And our people are really having to pay the price because they're having to share what little they have. And I'm sad to say that, the international response has been lacking. Some countries have been generous, and we're very grateful to that, but the scale and the scope of the crisis way outpace the support that we're getting. So a country like Jordan now is committing over 1/5 of our budget to directly cover the cost of refugees. And unfortunately, some wealthy countries have walked away from their responsibility to resettle refugees. So, from my perspective, I'm extremely proud of the Jordanian people, the patience and generosity that they've shown, but it also makes me sad that they've had to pay such a heavy price because of the global inaction. This is a humanitarian issue, and it's therefore a global responsibility. It is not the responsibility of one single region or one country like Jordan, which is really in no position to go it alone in the face of such global apathy. So I hope that we can keep this issue on our radar and not just express sympathy, which we hear a lot of, but actually we need the support.
As you say, Your Majesty, a lot of the wealthier countries are not doing anything. They're not taking their responsibility. You look at the region, you have all these countries that can do more. Why are they turning a blind eye?
I wouldn't say they're turning a blind eye, but I definitely think that in general, the global community really needs to prioritize this issue. I think we're living in a world where fear dominates, and I think people are fearing all the changes, the disruptive forces of change. One of them is migration, and I feel that when people are fearful, it affects the decisions they make. And unfortunately, that feeds into populist politics, which sometimes means that we shun away what's foreign and want to seek what's familiar. And that means not letting foreigners come into our country. And that's a real issue we have to face, because historically, countries have always benefited from diversity, and economies have grown when they've let other nationalities in. So I think it's a mentality of openness that we really need to embrace. With the issue of refugees and migration, until we really embrace the idea that the movement of people is part of the human experience. It's not apart from it, it's part of it. And we really need to come to terms with that. Only then can we really upgrade and remodel our humanitarian systems so that they're better able to respond to these crises. Otherwise, we'll just be limping from one crisis to the next, leaving a trail of heartbreak and broken lives behind. And I think that that's not to anybody's benefit.
Still ahead, Her Majesty on the plight of the Palestinian refugees and US President Trump's policies in the Middle East.
Our relationship with the United States is very historic and deep and goes beyond one particular issue or decision.
Your Majesty, you mentioned that a lot of countries do not want to take foreigners in, and of course, protectionism. President Trump, he doesn't want to let certain countries into the United States. Do you feel that he is wrong in doing this?
Well, I don't believe that he believes that. I mean, I think the whole concept of the United States, everyone says it's an idea, not just a country. And it was an idea built on diversity. It was built by people who've come from all parts of the world. And the mentality of openness and embracing and integration of other people is part of the mindset of all Americans, and it's part of the culture. And I don't think that that's something that can be reversed. And so I think that the majority of Americans understand that diversity is enriching and that there's so much to gain from taking people in. And again, it's the politics of fear that we really need to put to one side, because I think any country, we live in an economy where sound ideas are the most valuable asset. And you need to attract the best of the ideas and the best of talent, no matter where it comes from. And being open to that is always going to give an economy and a country an edge. Shunning people away based on their nationality or their background is something that will only hurt the country. And I know that President Trump is very focused on the economy and on making lives better for all Americans. And I think part and parcel of that is embracing talent wherever it comes from.
But he also, Your Majesty, he's announced the potential decision to withhold funds from Palestinian refugees. Are you worried by that?
Yes, and we're talking to them about that because, UNRWA is a very important organization, and I think cutting the aid that goes to them will have a devastating impact on many Palestinians, including hundreds of thousands of children who attend UNRWA schools. UNRWA is a lifeline for Palestinian refugees, and there are over 5 million of them. 40% are living in Jordan, and they rely on the organization for vital services, including health, education, etc., and assistance. And so we feel that their mandate should not end until there has been a resolution to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict and the establishment of a Palestinian state. Only then will their mandate end, and that is a day that we look forward to. In the meantime, it's very important to build trust with both sides, with both the Palestinians and the Israelis, so that the United States can be perceived as the honest broker that's going to deliver on a tangible outcome in this regard. And I feel that cutting funds to UNRWA will send the wrong signal at this stage. And let us not forget that the US has been very generous in supporting, and they have been some of the largest contributors to Palestinian refugees. So that is something we really appreciate, and we hope that that will continue so that we can really have the right kind of healthy atmosphere to build trust between both parties and really take us to that outcome to end this decades-long conflict that has crippled our region for way too long.
But Your Majesty, when you hear about decisions like this and other decisions, you were talking about solving the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, and when the administration announces the moving of the embassy to Jerusalem, do you feel that he understands the region?
Well, I think that speaking from the Jordanian perspective, our relationship with the United States is very historic and deep and goes beyond one particular issue or decision. When it comes to the embassy, that was, we felt, a decision that, again, it's all about sending the right kind of signals. And in moving the embassy to Jerusalem, that prejudges the status of Jerusalem, which the UN resolutions and international law state that should come within the context of a comprehensive peace with the Israelis and Palestinians and the establishment of a Palestinian state. So that prejudges the status, and it also renders the United States a biased broker, and that's not the kind of perception we want to create when we're trying to work towards a final status solution. And as you saw, it also stoked a lot of tensions, not only in the Arab world, but also internationally. So we need to go back to the building of the trust. Jerusalem should be a city of hope for everyone. It is a symbol of peace for Muslims, Christians, and Jews alike. And we've had the leaders of Christian churches come to us and express their worry about what's going on, because no single country should really have ownership of this city that symbolizes so much for humanity, and it goes beyond politics. And so I hope that we can get beyond this decision and really move to the issues that are important, and that is really the establishment of a Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as the capital, and reaching a final status solution on all the pending issues.
Still ahead, Her Majesty tells me about her hopes for the future.
The Arab world is made up of a population of predominantly young people who are educated and who are exposed, and they're connected, so they know what they want, and they want better. Over 600,000 have crossed the border into Bangladesh, sparking what is possibly the fastest growing humanitarian emergency the world has seen. One has to ask, why is the plight of this Muslim minority group being ignored? Why has the systematic persecution been allowed to play out for so long? Unfortunately, what we've been seeing is, as a result of some of the terrible acts of a very small minority on the fringes of Islam, where we, the majority, even think that they're on the outside of Islam, has led to a very strong anti-Muslim sentiment and a negative stereotype of Muslims, to the point where many around the world are unable to see Muslims as victims.
Your Majesty, also the perception of Muslims around the world too, I know, is something that is close to your heart, because I know you visited the Rohingya refugees last October. You went to Bangladesh and you were horrified at what you saw and the horrific stories that you heard from the refugees. What would you like the global community to do? Why, again, is humanity ignoring this?
You know, you're right. I mean, the conditions I saw were heart-wrenching. The stories I heard were nothing short of eradication of a whole minority group. And the people I saw were broken. And despite the mammoth efforts made by the aid organizations and by the government of Bangladesh, everywhere you look, misery stares right back at you. You know, I saw people living in very cramped conditions and in bamboo shelters and makeshift tents that are pitched in mud, and everybody scrambling for scarce resources and water and food. And I heard horrifying stories of people seeing their family members and loved ones slaughtered before their eyes, girls being repeatedly raped by soldiers, children, babies burnt alive. And so it really was heartbreaking, and I shudder to think what the situation is like now, 3 months later, and 50,000 refugees more. And the fact is that the Myanmar government doesn't recognize the Rohingya as citizens, which renders them stateless in their own country. And you know, the thing is that sometimes we are so distracted by so much news happening. And we look at an issue and it captures us for a moment or two, and we feel very strongly about it, and we feel angered by it. But then we move on to the next thing before we do anything about it. And with something like this, we need to remain engaged, to put pressure on the Myanmar government to stop this brutal campaign of ethnic cleansing and to start recognizing the rights of these Rohingya people, because only then will there be any semblance of safety for them. Because now there's an agreement offered by the, as you know, by the government of Myanmar to repatriate them to the very places that they fled because of persecution. So according to humanitarian law, and from a humanitarian perspective, you know, the protection of the refugees should be a top priority. And until there is something in that agreement that spells out and guarantees their safety, then I fear that their return will neither be safe, nor will it be voluntary. And it, in fact, could be a very dangerous situation. So what we need is to keep the international community to remain engaged and to keep the pressure on to really stop this campaign of ethnic cleansing that is playing in full view of the rest of the
whole
world.
world.
Yeah, the
The
whole
whole
world
world.
is watching this. So it's really on us. It's not enough to just say, oh, I feel bad about this. It's really important to take action.
What would you say to Aung San Suu Kyi? I mean, she's been a symbol of peace. She has the Nobel Peace Prize she won.
She's a symbol of peace, and she's somebody I highly respected and always associated with so much good. To see her now associated with such brutality and cruelty is really sad. And she's denying those people the very freedoms that she fought so hard for and sacrificed so much for. So if she wants to be on the right side of history, she needs to stand up and speak out and really take a position on this to make sure that she uses her moral authority to end this campaign that's going on.
Should they take away the Nobel Peace Prize, do you think, Your Majesty?
It's not for me to say that. It just, I think for her to feel that she can hold on to it, she cannot, see this playing in front of her and not be taking any position. So there's a real moral imperative here for her to act.
Just finally, Your Majesty, I just want to ask you, of course, coming from the Arab region, knowing it as you do, all the developments that we've seen there recently, what are your hopes for the region?
Well, I think we look at our part of the world, and it's so volatile, and you see so many regional rivalries and proxy wars and all the refugees that come and the displaced people, and there's so much destruction. But I think it's important to focus on the good side. The Arab world is made up of a population of predominantly young people who are educated and who are exposed, and they're connected, so they know what they want, and they want better. They are tired of all the conflict and war. That's not what they want. What they do want are jobs, opportunity, participation, a good education, a good life for their children. They're frustrated with all the zero-sum thinking that seems to be dominating our politics nowadays. They are predominantly against extremism and violence. So I think it's time for us to get off this destructive arc of crisis and conflict that we're on, and to really start thinking differently in our region and towards our region. A kind of thinking where you define winning as closing that human dignity deficit, where you measure success by the number of jobs created, opportunity, productive innovations, not political influence. So when I look at my region, I feel hopeful not for what is, but for what can be if we take the right policies and we adopt a different mentality.
Do you think the West understands the danger of the Sunni Saudi and the Shia Iran situation?
I think the world maybe overestimates the religious aspect of this conflict, because Muslims have, they share the same fundamental beliefs for the most part, and they have coexisted in our region for hundreds of years. So to better understand that conflict, you need to see it within the context of political agendas and competition for influence in the region. So it is more politics, the way I see it. It's more politics than religion. And it's one of the regional pressures and competitions that are happening in our region that we really need to look at. But, the region is just in no shape to deal with another escalation and another confrontation. We really need to be focusing on our individual countries, building the economies, reforming our structures, institutional building, and really giving hope for our young people for a better future. And education is a very important part of that.
Thank you so much for joining me, Your Majesty, on CNBC.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.